My world was measured in pixels, in lines of code, in the soft blue glow that washed over my face each night. 4 walls, that's all I needed. 4 walls and the quiet predictability of algorithms that behaved exactly as instructed. Unlike people. Unlike the unpredictable currents of the world beyond my door. At 22, I had mastered the art of invisibility in apartment 304. 3 years of remote work meant I could vanish into my monitors, into the virtual architecture I built, emerging only for necessities. The building's other residents were merely shadows passing in hallways. Ambient noise through thin walls. Background characters in the carefully isolated narrative I'd constructed. I had reasons for the quiet. Reasons that lived in the subtle tremor of my hands when faced with unexpected social interaction. Reasons etched into childhood memories of standing apart, of words catching in my throat while others flowed effortlessly through the world. So I built my own world instead. One where I controlled every variable, every outcome, until the day the walls began to come down. Literally. The first intrusion came at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in late September. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, suspended in that delicate space where thought transforms into code. 3 monitors surrounded me like sentinels, each displaying different fragments of the project that had consumed my attention for the past 14 hours. Headphones hugged my ears, ambient electronic music helping me sink deeper into the architecture of the software I was building. Then, a vibration. Subtle at first, like a distant subway train. My coffee rippled in concentric circles. The sensation traveled up through my desk, into my forearms. I pulled off the headphones just as the jackhammer hit something solid. Thud, 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 thud. The monitors trembled. A ceramic mug inched toward the edge of my desk. What the hell? I whispered to no one. I hadn't checked my email in days. Had there been a notice about construction? At 2 in the morning, beneath the jackhammer's assault came another sound, mechanical, rhythmic. A metallic tapping, followed by the unmistakable sound of a wrench against metal. Through the floor, from below. Apartment 204, the neighbor I'd never met. I knew almost nothing about him, only fragments gathered through incidental awareness, the low rumble of his motorcycle departing early mornings, the occasional whiff of motor oil in the stairwell, the fact that packages sometimes arrived for J. Reyes, Apt 204, that were left by my door by mistake. Now his presence pulsed up through the floorboards, the steady manipulation of metal against metal, a counterpoint to the construction chaos. The rhythm of it was almost like a heartbeat, deliberate and sure. Clank, turn, clank, turn. I pressed my palm to the floor, feeling the vibration travel through my hand. There was something soothing in that steady rhythm, something certain. Unlike the jarring, unpredictable assault of the jackhammer, his movements had purpose, precision. The construction racket suddenly intensified. My screen flickered as something heavy fell in the hallway. I hadn't saved in 40 minutes. Shit. I lunged for the keyboard, hitting Ctrl+S just as the power blinked, once, twice, and then stabilized. Sleep was impossible now. Coding was impossible. I sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, listening to the strange duet beneath. Chaos from the hallway, order from the apartment below. Destruction and creation, happening simultaneously. I realized I was still tracking the rhythm of his work. Clank, turn, clank, turn. The sound faded for a moment, then resumed with renewed purpose. I wondered what he was building down there, while everything around us was being torn apart. By morning, our building had transformed. The hallway that connected our apartments, once an unremarkable corridor of faded carpet and beige walls, had been stripped to concrete and exposed wiring. Yellow caution tape crisscrossed the entrance to the stairwell. A handwritten sign informed us that renovations would continue for approximately 3-4 weeks and to expect periodic service interruptions. I stared at the notice, sleep-deprived and disoriented. My carefully controlled environment had been breached. Worse, my pantry supplies were dwindling, and my regular grocery delivery would have nowhere to leave my packages. I would have to venture out. interact, adapt. For 3 days, I managed to slip through the construction zone unnoticed. Early mornings or late nights, head down, avoiding eye contact with workers. I rearranged my sleep schedule around the jackhammering, mapped the timing of the crew's lunch breaks, learned which parts of the hallway to avoid when the dust was heaviest. I was adapting, creating new patterns, new lines of code for navigating this temporary disruption. Until Friday, when I miscalculated. The email from my supervisor had required immediate attention, an urgent bug in the payment processing system, and I'd lost track of time. By the time I emerged from my apartment, hastily dressed and clutching my empty coffee thermos, the construction crew had already departed. But something was wrong. The corridor lights, usually motion-activated, remained dark. The elevator panel displayed an out-of-service sign, and the door to the stairwell, my escape route, was locked with a padlock that hadn't been there before. I was trapped. I tried the elevator button anyway. Nothing. I rattled the stairwell door. Solid. "They locked up early today," a voice said from behind me. I startled, nearly dropping my thermos. The lobby's emergency lights had clicked on, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. In the dim amber glow stood a figure I'd never fully seen before, only glimpsed in passing or heard through floorboards. Apartment 204, J. Reyes. He stepped forward, and the emergency light caught him in profile, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair cropped close at the sides but longer on top. His white t-shirt bore the faded logo of an auto shop, and dark stains, oil or grease, marked the worn denim of his jeans. He couldn't have been much older than me, but something in his posture, in the steady confidence of his movements, made him seem more substantial somehow, more present in the world. "Foreman's brother got married," he continued, his voice a low rumble that seemed to fill the empty lobby. "Whole crew took off at 4 to make the ceremony." Oh. The word felt inadequate in my mouth. I shifted my weight, suddenly aware of how thin and pale I must appear in the dim light. I didn't realize. "Yeah." He nodded slowly, eyes moving from the locked stairwell back to me. "We're stuck here till morning. Unless—" He let the word hang between us. Something in his expression shifted, a slight narrowing of the eyes, an assessment. "You're the guy upstairs, right? 304? I nodded, surprised he knew. "I'm Javier." He extended a hand. "Everyone calls me Javi." I hesitated before reaching out. His palm was warm, calloused, enveloping mine with gentle pressure. "Evan," I managed. "Nice to finally meet you, Evan." A small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Especially since I've been keeping you up with my midnight projects." Heat flushed my cheeks. "You heard me?" "Thin floors." He tapped his foot against the concrete. "I heard you pacing, then typing faster. Figured I was messing with your concentration." The realization that we'd been aware of each other, tracking each other's movements through ceiling and floor, sent an unexpected current down my spine. All this time, I thought I'd been invisible. "I don't mind," I said, which wasn't entirely true. "What are you working on down there?" Something lit in his eyes then, a spark of enthusiasm. "Motorcycle engine, 1908 Honda CB750, complete rebuild." I nodded as though this meant something to me. Javi laughed, a warm sound that echoed in the bare lobby. "You have no idea what that is, do you?" "Not really," I admitted. "But it sounds complicated." "It is, and beautiful." He shifted his weight, studied the locked stairwell door again. "Listen, I might be able to get us out of here. There's a service exit through the basement. Maintenance gave me access when I helped fix the building's generator last winter." The offer hung between us, a bridge extending from his world to mine. "Unless you'd rather wait for morning," he added when I didn't respond immediately. The thought of returning to my apartment, to the safety of my screens and code, pulled at me. But something stronger pushed back, curiosity, perhaps. Or the strange gravity of his presence. "No," I said, "I'd like to get out. If you can show me." Javi smiled, wide and genuine this time. "Follow me. And watch your step. It gets a little Mad Max down there. As we moved toward the maintenance door, I realized I was leaving my carefully controlled environment behind, stepping into unknown territory, with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. The basement corridor stretched before us like a concrete artery, pipes and conduits running along the ceiling. Emergency lights cast alternating pools of amber light and deep shadow. Javi moved with the confidence of familiarity, his toolbox swinging lightly at his side. "Mind the pipes," he warned, ducking beneath a low-hanging section of insulated metal. "Building's original plumbing from the 60s. They're supposed to replace it with the renovation, but I'll believe it when I see it." I followed his path exactly, hyper-aware of each step. "How do you know your way around down here?" "Curiosity," he said, glancing back at me. "First thing I do in any building is figure out how it works. Plus, I help Eduardo, the maintenance guy, when he's short-handed. The electrical in this place is a nightmare." We reached a junction where the corridor split 3 ways. Javi paused, considering, then pointed left. "This way. Service exits past the electrical room." As we walked, our footsteps echoed in syncopated rhythm. His, steady, purposeful. Mine, hesitant, careful. The contrast made me self-conscious. "So what do you do up there?" he asked as we navigated around a stack of paint cans. "In 304, I hear typing at all hours." "Software development," I replied. "Mostly back-end infrastructure, payment processing systems." "Freelance?" "No, remote for a financial tech company." He nodded. "Explains why I never see you around. You're a digital ghost." The observation landed with unexpected weight. A digital ghost. Was that how the world perceived me? How he perceived me? "Not much reason to leave," I said, defensive. "Everything I need comes to me." Javi stopped so abruptly, I nearly collided with his back. He turned, and in the half-light, his expression was unreadable. "Everything you need," he repeated, "or everything you think you need." Before I could formulate a response, a massive crash sounded from somewhere above, followed by the distinctive crack of splintering wood. The lights flickered violently. Javi's hand shot out, gripping my forearm, steadying me. Demo crew must have hit a support beam they didn't expect. His touch sent warmth radiating up my arm. When was the last time someone had touched me? Not the incidental contact of a food delivery handoff or the professional handshake of a rare in-person meeting, but a genuine, instinctive touch? I couldn't remember. The light stabilized. He released my arm. The warm imprint of his fingers lingered. "Come on," he said. "We're almost there." We continued in silence, the question he'd posed hanging between us. Everything I need, or everything I think I need? The distinction hadn't occurred to me before. My life was efficient, controlled, optimized. What needs could possibly exist beyond its carefully defined parameters? Yet here I was, following a stranger through darkened corridors, feeling more alert, more present than I had in months. The digital ghost, temporarily embodied. "Here we go." Javi stopped at a heavy metal door marked Emergency Exit. He set down his toolbox and extracted a ring of keys. "This will trigger an alarm if we're not quick. Once I open it, we need to be through and down the alley within 15 seconds, or security gets automatically called." I nodded, suddenly nervous. 15 seconds. "Don't worry." He smiled, the amber light catching the edges of his face. "I've got you." The simple phrase, "I've got you," hit with unexpected force. When was the last time anyone had got me? When had I last allowed it? Javi selected a key, inserted it into the lock. "Ready?" I took a deep breath. "Ready." The key turned. A high-pitched electronic beep began, monotonous and urgent. Javi pushed the door open, revealing a narrow concrete staircase leading up to the alley. "Go," he urged, grabbing his toolbox. I hurried up the steps, heart pounding with sudden adrenaline. Behind me, I heard the solid thud of the door closing, Javi's footsteps close behind. We emerged into the alley just as the beeping stopped. The evening air hit my face, crisp, real, carrying the scent of approaching autumn. The sky above was deepening blue, streetlights just beginning to illuminate the main road beyond the alley. Javi appeared beside me, slightly breathless, grinning. Made it. He looked different in natural light, more vivid somehow. The dark stubble along his jaw caught the gold of the setting sun. His eyes, which I now saw were deep brown, crinkled at the corners when he smiled. That was... I searched for the right word. Fun, he suggested. I surprised myself by laughing. I was going to say terrifying, but... Yes, fun. His grin widened. Then he glanced at his watch. Shit. I'm supposed to meet someone at 7. I've got to run. He hesitated, then added, You good from here? I nodded, though something in me sank at the thought of our paths diverging. Yeah, thanks for the rescue. Anytime, neighbor. He started to turn, then paused. Hey, if the construction gets too loud and you need a quiet place to work, my door's open. I'm usually in the garage during the day, but the apartment's empty. The offer was so unexpected I couldn't immediately process it. Thank you. That's really nice. No big deal. He shrugged, but his eyes held mine for a moment longer than necessary. See you around, Evan. Then he was gone, jogging down the alley toward the street, toolbox swinging at his side. I watched until he turned the corner and disappeared from view. Standing alone in the gathering dusk, I felt strangely bereft, as though something had been offered and withdrawn before I could fully grasp it. I made my way to the corner bodega, picked up basic necessities, and returned to the building through the main entrance. The elevator was working again. The hallway remained in disarray, but the construction crew had swept up the worst of the debris. Back in apartment 304, I settled into my familiar chair, screens glowing their welcome. My fingers found the keyboard, resumed their dance across familiar keys. Everything was as I'd left it. Everything was as it should be. Yet something had shifted. Some small recalibration had occurred. That night, for the first time in months, I found myself listening for the sounds from below. Waiting for the steady rhythm of metal against metal, for the heartbeat of creation to pulse up through the floorboards. The renovation intensified. Walls came down, exposing the building's skeleton. Dust seeped through every crack, coating surfaces with fine gray powder. The familiar became alien. Hallways rerouted, temporary barriers erected, landmarks removed. I adapted again, creating new routines. But something had changed in me since that encounter in the basement. I found myself noticing things I'd previously filtered out. The conversations between construction workers as they discussed weekend plans, the way afternoon light changed the color of the exposed brick, the steady rotation of neighbors navigating the disruption. And I noticed him, Javier Reyes, moving through the chaos with that same certainty I'd observed in the basement. Sometimes we passed each other, brief nods, small smiles. Once, he helped me carry groceries through a particularly treacherous section of scaffolding. His offer of his apartment as a quiet workspace hung between us, unacknowledged. I told myself I didn't need it, that my noise-canceling headphones were sufficient, that my routines were sacred, until the day the jackhammers found the building's main water line. I was deep in code when my screens went black. No warning, no time to save. The apartment plunged into silence as my computer fans wound down. Even the ambient hum of the refrigerator disappeared. Total power outage. I sat in stunned silence, staring at the dead monitors. 3 hours of work, gone. My deadline. Impossible now. From the hallway came shouts, the heavy tread of boots, urgent conversations. Then, a knock at my door. The building manager stood in the hall, looking harried. Power's out in the whole east wing, he explained. Contractor hit the main line. Electrician says minimum 8 hours to restore. 8 hours. My project was due in 6. Is there anywhere else with power? I asked, desperation edging into my voice. West Wing's fine. Units 201 through 204 have power. That's it. He was already moving down the hall, knocking on the next door. 201 through 204. Javi's apartment. I stood frozen in my doorway. His offer echoed in my memory. If the construction gets too loud and you need a quiet place to work, my door's open. This was more than noise. This was my livelihood. Before I could talk myself out of it, I grabbed my laptop, charger, and a notepad. Locked my door, made my way down the partially demolished staircase to the second floor. Apartment 204. I stood before it, heart hammering against my ribs. What if he'd just been being polite? What if he wasn't home? What if he was home? I raised my hand and knocked. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the dust-filled hallway. No answer. I knocked again, more firmly. Nothing. Relief and disappointment warred within me. I turned to leave and nearly collided with a figure coming up the stairs. Javi. He wore navy coveralls, unzipped to the waist with the arms tied around his hips, revealing a white tank top underneath. A smudge of something dark marked his cheekbone. His hair was damp with sweat. "Evan," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "Everything okay?" I gestured vaguely upward. "Power's out, my entire floor. I have a deadline, and I remembered your offer, but if it's not convenient—" "No, it's perfect timing," he interrupted, fishing keys from his pocket. "I was about to take a break anyway. The garage is like an oven today." He moved past me to unlock his door, and I caught his scent. Motor oil, metal, and something spiced and warm beneath. The door swung open to reveal a space so unlike what I'd expected that I momentarily forgot my panic. Where my apartment was minimalist, functional furniture in neutral tones, walls bare except for a single framed print, Javi's space exploded with life. Rich colors covered the walls. Deep blue in the living area, burnt orange in the kitchen alcove. Mismatched furniture that somehow worked together filled the space. A leather sofa, worn soft at the edges, a coffee table that appeared to be made from an old industrial gear set into a wooden frame, bookshelves overflowing with technical manuals and paperbacks. And plants. Everywhere, plants. Hanging from the ceiling, clustered on windowsills, sprawling across shelves. The apartment breathed with green life. "It's not much," Javi said, misinterpreting my silence, "but the power works, and it's quiet." "It's beautiful," I said before I could stop myself. He looked at me, surprise softening into something else. "Thanks. Make yourself at home. Desk by the window gets good light this time of day." I spotted the desk, a solid wooden surface with an ergonomic chair that looked far more comfortable than my own setup. It faced a window overlooking a small courtyard where afternoon light dappled through trees. "I need to shower," Javi continued, already moving toward what I assumed was the bathroom. "There's coffee in the kitchen. Wi-Fi passwords taped under the router by the TV." Then he was gone, the bathroom door closing behind him. I heard water running and tried not to think about him standing under the spray, washing away the day's work. I set up my laptop, connected to his Wi-Fi. Took a deep breath. The apartment smelled of coffee grounds, books, and faintly of motor oil. It was utterly foreign, and yet somehow immediately comfortable. I began to work. The familiar rhythm of coding gradually calmed my nerves, and I sank into the project. Time slipped by. At some point, I heard Javi emerge from the bathroom, move quietly around the apartment. A cabinet opened and closed. The refrigerator hummed. But he didn't interrupt. When I finally looked up, the quality of light had changed, softer, golden. Javi sat on the couch, a book open on his lap, a mug of something steaming beside him. He'd changed into clean jeans and a Henley pushed up to his elbows, revealing forearms mapped with the occasional small scar. Evidence of his work with engines and metal. He sensed my gaze and looked up. "How's it going?" "Good," I said, surprised to find it was true. "Really good. I think I'll make the deadline." He smiled, and something warm unfurled in my chest. "Hungry. I was about to make something." I glanced at the time on my laptop. I'd been working for nearly 3 hours. "I should probably head back up soon." "Power's still out," he said. "I checked with Eduardo 20 minutes ago. They're hoping to have it back by midnight." Midnight. The words sank in slowly. I was stranded here, in this alive, warm space, for hours yet. "Oh," I managed. In that case, yes, food would be good. Thank you. Javi nodded and rose, moving to the kitchen with easy grace. I watched him pull ingredients from the refrigerator, select a knife from a magnetic strip on the wall, begin chopping with practiced efficiency. Can I help? I offered, though I was a disaster in the kitchen. Almost done, he replied. Just need to let it simmer. How do you feel about curry? I like it, I said, though I couldn't remember the last time I'd had homemade curry. My meals were primarily delivery or microwaved. He worked in silence for a few minutes, then turned down the heat on a pot that now filled the apartment with rich, spiced aroma. He returned to the living area, grabbed his mug, and gestured to the balcony door. Want some air while it cooks? The small balcony overlooked the same courtyard as the window by the desk, but from this vantage point, I could see the entire space, a hidden pocket of green in the urban landscape. Two mismatched canvas chairs occupied the balcony, with barely enough room between them for a small table holding an ashtray and what appeared to be parts of a disassembled carburetor. Javi cleared the carburetor parts, setting them carefully inside. We sat in the canvas chairs, the evening air cool against my skin after hours hunched over the laptop. Thanks, I said after a moment, for letting me crash your space. Saving my job, basically. He shrugged. No big deal. Place was empty anyway. A comfortable silence settled between us. I watched the patterns of light shifting through leaves, listened to distant city sounds. So different from the view from my own window, which faced a brick wall. How long have you lived here? I asked. In this building? About 2 years. He took a sip from his mug. Before that, I was crashing at my sister's place while I saved up. Started my own garage about a year ago. Small place, but it's mine. Your own business? That's impressive. Not really. Just knew what I wanted and went for it. He glanced at me. What about you? Always been a digital ghost? I smiled at the callback to our first conversation. Pretty much. Went straight from college to remote work. This is my first apartment on my own. And you never leave it, he observed, but there was no judgment in his tone. I hesitated, then decided on honesty. I'm not great with people. Computers make sense. They do what you tell them to do. People are harder to decode. Javi nodded slowly. Fair enough. People are messy. He paused, studying me. But sometimes messy is where the good stuff happens. Something in his gaze made me look away, back to the courtyard. A squirrel darted across a branch, disappeared into leaves. You don't seem to have trouble with the mess, I said. He laughed softly. You haven't seen my garage. Organized chaos at best. He set his mug down. But yeah, I like people. They're interesting, full of surprises. Like what? The question slipped out before I could consider it. Javi turned in his chair to face me more fully. His eyes, deep brown with flecks of amber near the pupil, were intent. Like you, for instance. My breath caught. Me? Yeah, the quiet guy upstairs who never talks to anyone suddenly appears at my door. Turns out he notices everything, has opinions about apartment aesthetics, and can work through chaos like it's nothing. I wouldn't say that's surprising, I managed. Just adaptation. Adaptation is survival, Javi said. Surprised is allowing yourself to enjoy the change. The words lingered between us, carrying weight beyond their surface meaning. Before I could respond, a timer beeped from the kitchen. Food's ready, he said, rising from his chair. Hope you're hungry. We ate at his small kitchen table, the curry rich and complex over rice. I couldn't remember the last time I had shared a meal with someone, especially not something homemade. The simple act of passing salt, of reaching for water at the same time and laughing as our hands nearly collided. It all felt new and foreign and strangely right. Javi told stories about his day at the garage. A customer who insisted their car made a sound like a walrus with hiccups. An apprentice mechanic who'd accidentally sprayed himself with transmission fluid. I found myself laughing more than I had in months. When he asked about my work, I expected the glazed expression most people get when I talk about code. Instead, he asked thoughtful questions, drawing parallels between my software architecture and engine design that I'd never considered. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, stretching long after our plates were empty. "So wait," he said, leaning forward over his second beer. "You're telling me you've never even been to Prospect Park? It's like 15 minutes from here." I felt heat creep up my neck. "I've seen it, on maps." Javi shook his head, incredulous. "That's it. Next weekend I'm taking you. No excuses. There's this spot by the lake that's perfect for thinking through problems. I go there when I'm stuck on a design." The casual way he included me in his future plans caught me off guard. As though our paths crossing was not temporary, not just an accident of construction and power outages, but something ongoing. Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowned slightly. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah. Just..." He hesitated. "Guy I was supposed to meet tonight. Rescheduling." Something in his expression made me wonder if it was more than a casual meeting. A date, perhaps? The thought sent an unexpected pang through me. "I should probably get back to work," I said, suddenly self-conscious about taking up his evening. "I've still got a couple of hours before the deadline." "Of course." He collected our plates. "No rush. Power's still out upstairs anyway." I returned to the desk while he cleaned up in the kitchen. The code before me, so clear and focused earlier, now seemed to blur. I found myself distracted by his movements, by the domestic sounds of water running, dishes being put away, by the question of who had texted, who he might have met instead of spending the evening with me. I forced my attention back to the screen. Deadline, focus, code. An hour later, I hit submit on the project with 20 minutes to spare. Relief washed through me as the confirmation email arrived. "Done?" Javi asked from the couch, where he'd returned to his book. "Done," I confirmed. "Crisis averted." "Thanks to you." He waved away the gratitude. "Glad it worked out." As I packed up my laptop, the apartment intercom buzzed. Javi answered it, had a brief conversation, then turned to me. "Eduardo says power's back on upstairs. They got it working early." "Oh." I shouldered my bag. "That's good." Neither of us moved for a moment. The evening had taken on a strange, suspended quality, as though we existed temporarily outside normal time. Going back to my apartment, to my routine, suddenly felt like stepping backward. "I should probably..." I gestured vaguely toward the door. "Yeah," he agreed, but made no move to open it. I took a breath. "Thanks again, for everything. The workspace, the food." "Anytime." His voice had dropped lower. "I mean that, Evan. Anytime." Something in the way he said my name made my heart stutter. I needed to leave before I said something I couldn't take back, before I acknowledged the current that had been building between us all evening. "Good night, Javi," I managed, moving toward the door. "Night, Evan." He opened it for me. "See you around." The hallway seemed darker, emptier as I made my way back upstairs. My apartment, so familiar, so safe, felt strangely hollow when I returned. The air was stale, the silence absolute. I moved to the window, looked out at the brick wall opposite. No courtyard, no trees, no squirrels darting through leaves. Below, through the floorboards, I heard it again. The rhythmic sound of metal against metal. Clank, turn, clank, turn. The heartbeat had resumed. I pressed my palm to the floor, feeling the vibration travel through my hand. Closed my eyes, pictured him bent over the motorcycle engine, focused and intent, fingers moving with practiced precision. Sometimes messy is where the good stuff happens. His words echoed in my mind as I prepared for bed. I lay awake in the darkness, listening to the building settle around me, to the occasional sound from the apartment below. Thinking about curries and courtyard views, and the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. About adaptation and surprise. About living quietly for a reason, but something about him making me want to step outside my shell. The renovation entered its third week. The hallway took shape again. New drywall replacing the exposed studs, fresh paint covering institutional beige with warm cream. Workers installed recessed lighting, laid carpet underlayment. Progress was visible daily. I found myself venturing out more often, nodding to neighbors I'd previously avoided, even exchanging brief pleasantries with the construction foreman about the weather, the timeline for completion. And I found reasons to encounter Javi. Taking out trash at times, I'd noticed he often returned from the garage, checking my mail when his motorcycle rumbled into the parking lot. Our conversations remained casual, comments about the renovation, the unseasonably warm October, the noise level, but each carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite name, or perhaps was afraid to name. Then came the afternoon I found him sitting on an overturned paint can in the half-renovated third-floor hallway, toolbox at his feet. He wore his work coveralls again, this time fully zipped, with safety goggles pushed up onto his forehead. "Hey," he said, straightening when he saw me. "Perfect timing." "For what?" I paused, keys in hand. "Building manager asked me to check the electrical in this section." He gestured to an open panel in the wall. "But they're about to start testing the fire alarm system. It's going to be loud as hell." I winced. "Great, there goes my conference call." "Here." He reached into his toolbox and extracted what looked like industrial earmuffs, the kind construction workers wore around heavy machinery. "These should help." He held them out. When I reached to take them, our fingers brushed. A brief contact that sent electricity up my arm. The sensation must have shown on my face because his expression changed, softened. For a moment, we remained frozen, my fingers still touching his around the earmuffs, our eyes locked. Something unspoken passed between us. Then the hallway lights flickered, breaking the moment. "Thanks," I said, withdrawing my hand with the earmuffs. "That's really thoughtful." He shrugged, but his eyes remained on mine. "No big deal." I gestured toward my apartment. "I should..." "Yeah." He nodded. "Conference call." "Right." Neither of us moved. "Evan," he began, then stopped. The air between us seemed to thicken. His eyes, those deep brown eyes with flecks of amber, held mine with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Something was building in this half-renovated corridor, something neither of us had named. In that suspended moment, the overhead lights abruptly cut out. Darkness enveloped us, sudden and complete. The construction crew had been rewiring sections of the building all week. Power outages were common, but the timing of this one felt almost deliberate, as though the universe itself was creating a private space where we might speak truths that daylight wouldn't permit. I fumbled for my phone, activating the flashlight. The harsh white beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust particles suspended in the air between us, tiny constellations made visible only in darkness. "Power's out again," I said unnecessarily, my voice soft in the quiet hallway. "Yeah." Javi hadn't moved. The flashlight beam caught half his face, throwing the other half into shadow. His expression was unreadable. "Been happening a lot lately." We stood in silence, neither willing to break the strange spell that had fallen over us. Somewhere in the distance, a door closed, footsteps receded. The building seemed to hold its breath. Then Javi stepped forward, closing the distance between us. My heartbeat accelerated. He reached out, his hand hovering near mine, not quite touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "Evan," he said again, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. The emergency lights snapped on, casting eerie amber shadows across the hallway. Whatever he'd been about to say dissolved in the sudden illumination. He withdrew his hand, stepping back as though caught doing something forbidden. "I should check the electrical panel," he said, his voice returning to normal, probably just a circuit breaker. "Right." I took a breath, trying to steady myself. "And I have that call." "Right." Another weighted silence. Neither of us moved. Then, suddenly, Javi reached out. His thumb pressed into the center of my palm, a deliberate, unmistakable gesture. His eyes never left mine as he slowly lifted my hand toward his lips. My breath caught. Time stretched, elastic and infinite. I could feel his warm breath against my skin, the slight tremor in his fingers as they held mine. I wanted this, wanted it with an intensity that shocked me. Yet some part of me, the part that had spent years building walls and writing code that created order from chaos, hesitated. This was uncharted territory. This was a variable I couldn't control. Before his lips could touch my skin, before I could decide whether to pull away or lean in, footsteps sounded on the stairwell, heavy boots, construction workers returning. Javi released my hand, stepping back just as two men in hard hats rounded the corner. They nodded to us casually, oblivious to what they'd interrupted. "Electrical's out again," one of them called to Javi. "Eduardo's checking the main panel downstairs." Javi nodded, all business now. "I'll take a look at this section. Might be related." He turned to me, his expression carefully neutral. "Better use those earmuffs. They're about to start the alarm test once power's back." Just like that, the moment evaporated, leaving me clutching industrial earmuffs and wondering if I'd imagined the intensity of what had just passed between us. "Thanks," I managed. "I should go." As I retreated to my apartment, I could feel his eyes following me. The weight of what hadn't happened, what had almost happened, pressed against my chest with each step. Inside, I leaned against the closed door, heart still racing. Through the floor, I listened for movement, for the familiar heartbeat of metal against metal. But there was only silence. For 3 days afterward, we didn't cross paths. The renovation continued, the building transforming around us. But Javi seemed to have vanished, his motorcycle absent from its usual parking spot, no sounds filtering up through my floorboards at night. I told myself it was coincidence, that he was busy with his garage, with his life, that the moment in the hallway had been nothing. A misread signal, a product of isolation and proximity. Yet I found myself listening for his footsteps, watching for his motorcycle, manufacturing reasons to check the mail or take out trash. The quiet of the apartment below became a presence in itself, an absence that grew more noticeable with each passing day. On the fourth evening, as sunset painted my walls with golden light, text message appeared on my phone from an unknown number. "Rooftop, 8 p.m. Bring a jacket. No signature. No explanation." But I knew, with absolute certainty, who had sent it. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could ignore it, could pretend I'd never received it, could retreat back into the safe, predictable world I'd constructed so carefully. Instead, I typed, "I'll be there." At 7:55, I pushed through the heavy door leading to the building's roof. The renovation hadn't yet reached this space. It remained untouched, a flat expanse of weathered concrete surrounded by a low wall. Air conditioning units hummed. Tskakai. Water towers loomed against the twilight sky, and there, in the far corner, was Javi. He'd set up a small table, really just a wooden board balanced on paint cans, with two folding chairs. A battery-powered lantern cast a warm glow over what appeared to be takeout containers. A bottle of wine stood open. He turned as the door closed behind me, and the smile that spread across his face made my chest tighten. "You came," he said, as though he'd half expected I wouldn't. I said I would. I moved toward him, suddenly self-conscious. "What is all this?" "Dinner." He gestured to the makeshift table. "They're rewiring the East Wing tonight. Eduardo told me power would be out from 8 till midnight. Figured you might be hungry." The casual explanation couldn't mask the deliberateness of the setup, the care taken in creating this unlikely oasis of calm above the chaos of renovation. "That's thoughtful," I said, settling awkwardly into one of the folding chairs. "But you could have just texted me to come downstairs, to your place." Javi poured wine into 2 plastic cups before responding. "I needed neutral territory." "Neutral territory." He handed me a cup, his fingers brushing mine in the exchange. "For what I want to say. For what happened, or almost happened, in the hallway." My heart stuttered. "Nothing happened in the hallway." "Exactly." His eyes met mine over the rim of his cup. "Nothing happened. But something was going to happen." The directness of his statement left no room for evasion. For 3 days, I'd managed to convince myself I'd misread the situation, that the intensity had been one-sided. Now, sitting across from him on a rooftop with the city spread out below us, I couldn't maintain the pretense. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "You don't have to say anything." He began opening takeout containers, revealing fragrant curry, similar to what he'd cooked for me, but from a restaurant this time. "Just eat, talk, be here." The simple request disarmed me. Just be here. As though my presence alone was what he wanted. We ate in relative silence at first, the curry rich and warming in the cool night air. City sounds drifted up from below, traffic, distant sirens, the occasional burst of laughter from pedestrians. I found myself relaxing by increments, the initial awkwardness giving way to something more comfortable. "So," I ventured finally, "where have you been the past few days?" A slight smile touched his lips. Noticed I was gone. The question could have been teasing, but something in his tone suggested he genuinely wanted to know. Yes, no sounds through the floor, no motorcycle in the lot." He nodded, scraped the last of the curry from his container. "I was at my sister's place in Queens. Needed to think." About? About the fact that I almost kissed my upstairs neighbor's hand in a construction zone. His directness startled me again, about the fact that I've been thinking about him more than is probably healthy. About what any of that means. The air between us changed again, charged with the same electricity I'd felt in the hallway. "And," I managed, my voice barely audible above the distant hum of jackhammers starting up again somewhere in the building below. Javi set down his fork, leveled his gaze at me. "And I decided I'm not going to apologize for wanting something. For wanting..." He paused. "Someone." The world seemed to narrow to just this rooftop, just this moment, just his eyes holding mine across a makeshift table as twilight deepened around us. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Whatever this is." "Do you think I do?" A soft laugh escaped him. "All my life I've fixed others' problems. Engines, brakes, leaks. But you..." He hesitated, vulnerability flickering across his features. "You make me feel like someone's finally tuning into me. Like someone sees past what I can do with my hands to what's happening inside." The confession, so raw, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. This man who moved through the world with such certainty, such capability, was admitting uncertainty. Was admitting that I, socially awkward, perpetually isolated, emotionally guarded, somehow saw him in a way others didn't. "I don't know what to do with that," I confessed. "You don't have to do anything with it." He reached across the table, his hand stopping just short of mine. "Just don't disappear on me." As though summoned by his words, the rooftop door burst open. A group of our neighbors poured out, carrying blankets and drinks, laughing among themselves. "Power's out," one of them called cheerfully when they spotted us. "Rooftop party." Just like that, our private space was invaded. The moment fractured, the intimacy dispersed by the arrival of others. Javi glanced at me, a question in his eyes. "Stay? Go?" I hesitated. The easy path would be escape, back to my apartment, back to solitude. But something in me rebelled against retreat. "Let's stay," I said quietly. "For a little while." The smile that spread across his face was worth the discomfort of social interaction. He nodded, then turned to greet our neighbors with easy charm. What followed was unexpected, an impromptu gathering as more residents escaped their darkened apartments for the communal space of the roof. Someone brought a portable speaker. Another produced a deck of cards. Wine bottles multiplied. The renovation that had disrupted all our lives became a source of shared commiseration, of community I hadn't known existed in this building where I'd lived for years. Throughout it all, Javi remained close, a steady presence at my side. Occasionally, his hand would brush mine, or his shoulder would press against mine as we leaned against the low wall, looking out at the city lights. Small contacts, easily dismissed as accidental. But I knew better. Each touch was deliberate, a silent communication between us. As the night deepened and neighbors gradually drifted back to their apartments, we found ourselves once again alone on the roof. The makeshift table had been dismantled, the lantern extinguished. Only the ambient glow of the city illuminated the space now. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Javi asked, leaning beside me against the wall. "Being social?" I smiled despite myself. "It was interesting. I didn't know Mrs. Abernathy from 503 used to be a competitive poker player." He laughed, the sound warm in the night air. "See, people are full of surprises." We fell silent, looking out at the city, a tapestry of lights stretching to the horizon. "I should head back," I said eventually, though something in me resisted the idea of ending this strange, suspended evening. "I'll walk you down," he offered. We descended the stairs in companionable silence. The emergency lights cast their amber glow along the hallways, still under construction, but nearing completion. Paint cans and supplies were stacked neatly against walls. Tarps covered areas of fresh work. When we reached my floor, I expected him to continue down to his own apartment. Instead, he paused with me outside my door. "Thanks," I said, keys in hand. "For dinner, for everything. Anytime." He studied my face in the dim light, something unresolved in his expression. "I meant what I said up there. About not disappearing." "I know." We stood there, another moment stretching between us, full of possibility, fraught with uncertainty. I could invite him in. Could take a step I'd never anticipated taking when the renovation began. Could breach the final barrier between our separate worlds. Instead, I heard myself ask the question that had been gnawing at me since our encounter in the hallway. "Why me?" Confusion flickered across his face. "What do you mean?" "Why me?" I repeated, the words catching in my throat. "You're—" I gestured vaguely at him, at his easy confidence, his obvious appeal. "And I live inside screens and code. I'm the digital ghost, remember? Am I strong enough to hold someone like you?" The vulnerability of the question left me exposed in a way coding never had. I'd spent years constructing walls, creating distance. Now I was asking him to see through them, to tell me what he saw on the other side. Javi's expression softened. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the heat from his body, could smell the now familiar scent of him, motor oil and spice and something uniquely his. "You think I'm strong?" His voice was low, intimate in the empty hallway. "I rebuild engines because they make sense. Parts fit where they're supposed to fit. When something breaks, there's always a reason. A loose connection, worn metal, improper torque. The physical world follows rules." He reached out, his fingers barely grazing my cheek, so light I might have imagined it. "People are harder. Feelings don't follow diagrams. You hide behind screens, I hide behind engines. Different shields, same instinct." The observation struck me with its accuracy. I'd never considered that his mechanical aptitude might be its own form of retreat, a way of engaging with the world that was structured, predictable. "So we're both hiding," I murmured. "Were," he corrected, "until renovation forced us to see each other." Something shifted between us then. An understanding, an acknowledgement. The distance I'd perceived between us, the fundamental difference I'd imagined, collapsed. We stood in the dim hallway not as opposites, but as mirrors, each recognizing in the other a familiar caution, a similar need for control. I don't know which of us moved first. Perhaps we both did, drawn by the same invisible current that had been pulling us toward each other since the first jackhammer shook my desk. All I know is that suddenly, his lips were on mine, and the world contracted to just this point of contact, warm, insistent, questioning. The kiss was brief, tentative. He pulled back slightly, his eyes searching mine for confirmation, for permission. I answered by leaning in again, my hand finding the back of his neck, drawing him closer. The second kiss deepened, intensified. His body pressed mine against my apartment door, his hands framing my face with unexpected gentleness. Everything beyond this moment receded. The renovation, the building, the careful constructions of my isolated life. All that remained was the sensation of his mouth on mine, the solidity of his body against mine, the soft sound that escaped him as I tentatively traced the seam of his lips with my tongue. When we finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, the world gradually reasserted itself. The hallway, the emergency lights, the reality of what had just happened, what was happening between us. "I should go," he said, though he made no move to step away. "It's late." "Yeah," I agreed, equally motionless. His thumb traced my lower lip, still sensitive from our kiss. "Can I see you tomorrow?" The normalcy of the question, so ordinary, so dating, brought me back to myself. This was real. This was happening. This wasn't code or screens or the safe, controlled environment I'd built. "Yes," I said, before doubt could intervene. "Tomorrow." He smiled, that smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, that made something warm unfurl in my chest. "Good night, Evan." "Good night, Javi." I watched him descend the stairs, waited until he disappeared from view before unlocking my door. Inside, I leaned against the closed door, heart hammering against my ribs, lips still tingling from his kiss. Through the floor, I could hear movement in the apartment below. The familiar sound of cabinets opening and closing, water running. Then, after a moment, the rhythmic sound of metal against metal, his late-night work on the motorcycle engine resuming. I pressed my palm to the floor, felt the vibration travel through my hand. But now the sound had transformed, no longer just ambient noise from a stranger's apartment. Now it was his heartbeat, his presence, a connection between our separate spaces. I slept deeply that night, the sound of his work a comforting lullaby. Morning brought clarity, and, with it, doubt. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Same pale face, same dark circles beneath my eyes, same person I'd always been. Yet something had changed. I'd kissed a man in the hallway of my apartment building. A man who fixed motorcycles and cooked curry from scratch, and saw something in me I couldn't identify. The renovation continued around us, walls painted, fixtures installed, carpet laid. But a more profound renovation had begun inside me. Something being dismantled, something new taking shape in its place. Javi texted mid-morning. "Coffee break?" "Service stairwell, 11 a.m. The service stairwell, the narrow, rarely used stairs at the back of the building. Private, hidden, secret. The implication wasn't lost on me. Whatever was happening between us would happen in shadows, away from the main corridors where neighbors and construction workers moved. Away from potential observers. "I'll be there," I replied. At 11, I slipped through the heavy metal door into the service stairwell. The space was narrow, concrete, lit by bare bulbs at each landing. It smelled of dust and disuse. I descended to the landing between our floors and waited, heart racing with anticipation and something like fear. Footsteps sounded below. Then Javi appeared, climbing toward me. He wore work clothes again, dark jeans, a faded t-shirt with his garage's logo, a flannel tied around his waist. He carried 2 paper cups. "Hey," he said, reaching the landing. "Wasn't sure how you take it, so I got it black. Sugar and cream packets in my pocket if you need them." The normalcy of the gesture, coffee, cream packets, felt surreal against the backdrop of my racing thoughts, of the memory of his mouth on mine the night before. "Black is fine," I said, accepting the cup. "Thanks." We stood in awkward silence, the narrow landing forcing us to stand close. The air between us seemed to vibrate with unspoken words, with potential energy. "So," he began, then stopped, took a sip of coffee. "About last night." My stomach dropped. This was it, the rational morning after retreat, the acknowledgement that whatever had flared between us had been a mistake, a momentary lapse. "I don't regret it," he continued, his eyes finding mine. "Not at all, but..." "But?" My voice sounded distant to my own ears. He set his coffee on the concrete step, then took mine and did the same. His hands, now free, found my waist, tentative, questioning. "But I've been thinking about doing it again since I woke up," he finished, his voice dropping lower. "If that's okay with you." Relief and desire flooded through me simultaneously. Yes, I managed. That's... yeah. This time there was no hesitation. His mouth found mine with certainty, with purpose. His body pressed mine against the concrete wall, his hands moving from my waist to my hair. The kiss deepened immediately, all the restraint of the previous night's first encounter evaporating in the secluded stairwell. I hadn't realized how touch-starved I was until his hands were on me. The simple human contact, skin against skin, breath mingling, the slight stubble of his jaw against mine, awakened something primal, something I'd suppressed beneath layers of code and isolation. My hands found their way beneath his t-shirt, exploring the warm skin and solid muscle of his back. He made a soft sound against my mouth, his body pressing more insistently against mine. I could feel his heartbeat, rapid, strong, echoing my own. The kiss became more urgent, more desperate. His thigh pressed between mine, creating friction and pressure that made me gasp against his mouth. His lips moved to my neck, teeth grazing sensitive skin, sending electricity down my spine. "Javi," I breathed, unsure if I was asking him to stop or continue. He pulled back slightly, his breathing ragged, his eyes dark with desire. "Too much?" "No," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "Not enough." Something flashed in his eyes, hunger, relief, something deeper I couldn't name. He leaned in again, his lips brushing mine with unexpected tenderness. "We should slow down," he murmured against my mouth. "Not here, not like this." The rational part of me knew he was right. A service stairwell was hardly the place for what my body was urgently suggesting. Yet another part rebelled against the suggestion, wanting to keep him close, to continue this exploration of touch and sensation. "Tonight," he said, his forehead resting against mine. "Come to my place. I'll make dinner." The invitation hung between us, an escalation, a next step, a movement from furtive encounters in hallways and stairwells to something more deliberate, more acknowledged. "Okay," I agreed, my voice barely audible in the narrow space. "What time?" 7. He brushed his lips against mine once more. A gentle promise. "I finish at the garage at 6. We retrieved our coffee cups, straightened our clothes, attempted to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. But something had shifted irreversibly. We were no longer neighbors who occasionally encountered each other in renovation chaos. We were something else. Something unnamed but undeniable. "I should get back," I said. "Work calls." He nodded, but caught my hand as I turned to ascend the stairs. "Evan." I looked back at him, at those eyes that seemed to see more of me than I'd allowed anyone to see in years. "This is real," he said simply. "Whatever this is, it's real to me." The words followed me back to my apartment, echoed as I tried to focus on code, on deadlines, on the familiar rituals of my workday. This is real, not virtual, not theoretical, not safely contained within screens and algorithms. Real, messy, human. By evening, doubt had crept back in. I changed clothes 3 times before settling on simple jeans and a dark blue button-down. Paced my apartment, considered texting to cancel, claiming illness or an urgent work project. Because what came after dinner, after wine and conversation, and the inevitable return to the physical connection we'd started exploring? What came after we crossed a threshold that couldn't be uncrossed? At 6:55, I stood outside his door, hand raised to knock, heart hammering against my ribs. I could still turn back, could still retreat to the safety of apartment 304, to the world I understood and controlled. Instead, I knocked. Javi opened the door immediately, as though he'd been waiting just on the other side. He'd showered, his hair was still damp, curling slightly at the ends. He wore clean jeans and a dark green Henley that made his eyes seem even warmer. The apartment behind him smelled of garlic and herbs, and something sweet. "Hi," he said, stepping back to let me enter. "Right on time." The apartment was subtly different from my previous visit, tidier, with fresh flowers in a simple glass vase on the coffee table. Music played softly from hidden speakers, something instrumental, jazz maybe. The plants still crowded every surface, but they seemed more deliberately arranged. He'd made an effort. For me. Something smells amazing, I said, following him to the kitchen. Nothing fancy. Just pasta with my grandmother's sauce recipe and dessert. He gestured to what appeared to be a homemade flan cooling on the counter. My sister says I'm showing off when I make it, but it's the only dessert I know how to do well. The confession, slightly self-deprecating, slightly proud, eased some of the tension, nodding my shoulders. I'm impressed regardless. I can barely make toast without burning it. He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Good thing one of us can cook then. The casual implication that we were becoming an us, a unit, sent a flutter through my stomach. I accepted the glass of wine he offered, watched as he moved confidently around the kitchen, putting final touches on the meal. Dinner was served at his small kitchen table, candles providing most of the illumination. The pasta was indeed amazing. Rich, complex flavors that spoke of tradition and care. Conversation flowed more easily than I'd expected. The awkwardness I'd feared dissolving as we talked about our days, about the progress of the renovation, about a documentary Javi had recently watched on deep-sea exploration. It felt normal, comfortable, as though we'd been having dinner together for years instead of days. After we'd finished the flan, which was delicious enough that I accepted a second small serving, we moved to the couch with the remainder of the wine. The shift from table to living room carried its own tension, its own implications. "Can I ask you something?" Javi said after a moment of comfortable silence. "Of course. When did you know that you were interested in men?" The question wasn't what I'd expected. I considered it, swirling the wine in my glass. I think I always knew, but I acknowledged it in high school. There was a guy in my computer science class. Smart, confident, everything I wasn't. I couldn't stop looking at him. Javi nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What happened?" "Nothing. I never said anything. He graduated and went to MIT. I stayed in my shell." I took a sip of wine. "What about you?" A shadow passed over his face. "It's complicated." "We don't have to talk about it," I offered. "No, I want to." He set his wine glass down, turned to face me more fully. "My family is traditional, Catholic. My father worked construction his whole life. Expected me to be a certain kind of man." He paused. "I tried. Dated girls in high school. Even got engaged briefly after graduation." This surprised me. "What happened?" "I couldn't keep pretending." His gaze dropped to his hands. "Broke her heart. My family barely spoke to me for a year afterward. My father..." He shook his head. "He came around eventually. Sort of. We have an unspoken agreement now. He doesn't ask. I don't tell." The pain underlying his words was evident, even as he tried to keep his tone light. "Is that why we're meeting in service stairwells?" I asked gently. "Because of your family?" "Partly," he admitted. "But it's more than that. The garage is my business, my livelihood. Most of my clients are traditional guys, car enthusiasts, mechanics, truckers. If word got out that I'm..." He hesitated. "If anyone finds out, my garage, my reputation, everything could collapse." The reality of his situation settled over me like a weight. What we were exploring carried real consequences for him. Professional, financial, familial. Consequences my remote work and isolated lifestyle largely insulated me from. "I understand," I said, though part of me ached at the implication. Whatever was happening between us would remain hidden, a secret kept in service stairwells and private apartments. "I'm scared too." He looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "You are? Of what?" The question caught me off guard. What was I afraid of? Not professional consequences. Not family rejection. My parents, though distant, had never expressed anything but acceptance when I'd come out to them in college. "Of this?" I said finally, gesturing between us. "Of feeling something I can't control. Of letting someone see past my walls. Of..." I hesitated. "Of not being enough. For someone like you." Javi studied me for a long moment, his expression softening. Then he reached out, his hand finding mine on the couch between us. "You still don't see it, do you?" "See what?" "That you're extraordinary." The simple statement, delivered without irony or exaggeration, left me momentarily speechless. "You live in a world of abstract concepts and virtual architecture. You create things I can't even visualize. Your mind works in ways mine never could." His thumb traced patterns on my palm as he spoke. "When you talk about your work, about coding and systems, your whole face changes. You become illuminated, like you're lit from within." The observation, so personal, so perceptive, startled me. I hadn't realized he'd been watching me that closely, reading my expressions, seeing past the careful neutrality I tried to maintain. "That's how you see me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's who you are," he corrected. "You just don't let many people see it." Something shifted in my chest, a loosening, an expansion. He wasn't seeing past my walls. He was seeing them as part of me, as structures that had shaped me rather than merely hidden me. He's like a spark in the dark, and with me, he dares to glow. The thought formed unbidden in my mind, startling me with its clarity. That's what I saw in him. Not just physical attraction, not just the novelty of connection, but a certain radiance that seemed to intensify when we were together. We were illuminating each other. The realization must have shown on my face, because Javi leaned closer, his free hand coming up to cup my cheek. "There," he said softly. "That's the look I was talking about." Then he was kissing me, and I was kissing him back, and the careful distance we'd maintained through dinner collapsed entirely. My hands found their way into his hair, drawing him closer. His arms encircled me, strong and certain. Unlike the desperate, hungry kisses of the service stairwell, this was slower, deeper, more deliberate. An exploration rather than a claiming. His hand skimmed under the hem of my shirt, warm against my skin. I arched into his touch, wanting more. Wanting everything. When he pulled back, we were both breathing heavily. His eyes had darkened, pupils dilated. "We should slow down," he murmured, echoing his words from the stairwell. "Why?" The question escaped before I could consider it. A smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Because I want to savor this. Savor you." His thumb traced my lower lip. "We have time." The simple statement contained multitudes. We have time. Not just tonight, not just a furtive encounter, but a future stretching beyond this moment. Days, weeks, perhaps more. "Day," he said, his voice low. "Not for that, not yet, just stay. Watch a movie, fall asleep talking, let me make you breakfast in the morning." The invitation, so domestic, so normal, made my throat tighten unexpectedly. How long had it been since someone had wanted simply to be with me? Not for what I could produce or provide, but for my presence alone. "Okay," I said, the word feeling like a door opening. "I'll stay." His smile, wide, genuine, lighting his eyes, was worth any uncertainty, any fear. We settled on the couch, bodies aligned, his arm around my shoulders. He selected a film, something about space exploration, visually stunning but undemanding. I found myself relaxing by degrees, my head eventually coming to rest against his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. At some point, I must have fallen asleep. I woke to find the TV dark, the apartment silent except for Javi's even breathing. We had shifted positions, now lying fully on the couch, his body curved protectively around mine, one arm draped over my waist. The digital clock on his cable box read 3:17 a.m. I should get up, I thought. Should return to my own apartment, my own bed, my own controlled environment. Instead, I settled back against him, feeling his arm tighten instinctively around me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to be held, to exist in the unplanned, uncontrolled, beautiful mess of human connection. I slept deeply, dreamlessly, until morning light filtered through his plants, casting dappled shadows across us both. Days passed, the renovation neared completion. Hallways gleamed with fresh paint and new carpet. Light fixtures were installed, tested, approved. The building transformed around us as something equally profound transformed within us. We fell into patterns, Javi and I. Coffee in the service stairwell before he left for the garage. Texts throughout the day, observations, questions, photos of interesting engines, or lines of code. Dinner together most evenings, alternating between his apartment and mine, though mine felt increasingly sterile, unlived in, compared to the vibrant life of his space. Nights spent talking until exhaustion claimed us, bodies gradually becoming more familiar, boundaries slowly dissolving. Learning each other's stories, habits, histories. The locations of scars in sensitive places. The expressions that signaled joy or distress or desire. We were careful. Always careful. Meeting him in private, maintaining casual distance in public spaces. If neighbors noticed our sudden friendship, they didn't comment. The renovation provided convenient cover, 2 residents navigating chaos together, nothing more. But in private, in the sanctuary of his apartment with its jungle of plants, or in mine with its minimalist quiet, we were becoming something neither of us had anticipated. Something neither had dared hope for. Do you ever think about before? I asked one evening as we sat on his small balcony watching twilight settle over the courtyard. Before the renovation? Before we met? Javi considered the question, his fingers idly tracing patterns on my forearm where it rested between us. Sometimes it feels like a different life now. It was only 6 weeks ago, I pointed out. 6 weeks can change everything. He turned to me, his expression serious in the fading light. Are you having regrets? No, I said immediately, surprising myself with the certainty. No regrets, just wondering what would have happened if they'd never started construction. If we'd just continued passing each other in hallways, never speaking. The thought created an unexpected hollowness in my chest. The alternate reality where I remained isolated in apartment 304, where he continued rebuilding engines in 204, where our paths remained parallel but separate. I'd have found a reason, Javi said after a moment. A reason? To knock on your door. To introduce myself. His smile held a hint of mischief. I noticed you long before the jackhammer started, Evan. The admission startled me. You did? Hard not to notice the guy who never makes eye contact in the elevator, who slips through hallways like he's trying to be invisible. He squeezed my arm gently. I was curious about you. The renovation just gave me an excuse. The revelation that I hadn't been as invisible as I'd thought, that he'd seen me before I'd become aware of him, shifted something in my understanding of our narrative. Perhaps this wasn't random chance. Perhaps some gravity had been pulling us toward each other all along. I'm glad, I said simply, that you had an excuse. His smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way that never failed to make my heart stutter. Me too. 2 nights later, everything changed again. I was working late, absorbed in a particularly challenging section of code, when the power abruptly cut out. My screens went black, plunging the apartment into darkness. Not again, I muttered, reaching for my phone to activate the flashlight, but this was different from the previous outages. No shouts from the hallway, no sounds of construction. Just complete, eerie silence. I moved to the window, looked out at the surrounding buildings. They too were dark. Not just our building then, a neighborhood blackout. My phone buzzed with a text from Javi. You okay up there? Fine, I replied. Just lost my work. Again, come down, he suggested. I've got candles and wine. The invitation required no consideration. I grabbed a sweater and my phone, made my way down the darkened stairwell to his floor. His door was ajar, warm candlelight spilling into the hallway. Inside, dozens of tea lights and pillar candles transformed the apartment into a space both intimate and slightly surreal. Shadows danced on walls as the flames flickered. Plants became mysterious silhouettes, the familiar made strange and beautiful by darkness and fire. Javi stood in the kitchen, uncorking a bottle of red wine. He wore faded jeans and a simple black t-shirt, his feet bare on the wooden floor. In the candlelight, his features seemed more defined. Cheekbones sharper, eyes deeper, the curve of his mouth more pronounced. "Welcome to the blackout party," he said, pouring wine into glasses. "Eduardo says it might be ours. Something about a transformer explosion on the main grid." I accepted the glass he offered, took a sip. "It's beautiful in here. Emergency preparedness." He gestured to the candles with a slight smile. "My sister makes fun of me for always being ready for a disaster." "Seems smart to me," I said, moving closer to him. "Being prepared. Sometimes the unexpected is better." He set his glass down, hands finding my waist, drawing me against him. "Sometimes disruption is exactly what you need." The double meaning wasn't lost on me. Our entire relationship had been born of disruption, of renovation and change and systems being reconfigured. What had seemed inconvenient, even invasive, had become the catalyst for something neither of us had known we were seeking. His lips found mine in the candlelight, the kiss deepening immediately. Wine warmth and desire pooled low in my stomach as his hands slid beneath my sweater, palms flat against my back, pulling me closer. We had been taking things slowly, an unspoken agreement to allow this fragile new connection time to strengthen before testing its limits. But something about the blackout, about darkness and candlelight and the strange suspension of normal life created a sense of urgency, of now or never. My hands found the hem of his t-shirt, tugged upward. He broke the kiss long enough to allow me to pull it over his head, revealing the body I'd felt but not fully seen. Broad shoulders, defined chest. Skin several shades darker than mine. A tattoo I hadn't known about curved along his right ribs, some kind of mechanical design, elegant and intricate. "Bedroom," he murmured against my mouth. "If you're sure." I was sure. More sure than I'd been of anything in a very long time. He led me through the darkened apartment to his room, where more candles burned on the dresser and bedside table. The sheets were rumpled. He hadn't expected company, but I found the evidence of his actual life, not tidied for visitors, oddly moving. We undressed each other slowly, each new revelation of skin met with hands and lips, with whispered appreciation. When we finally lay together on his bed, nothing between us but candlelight and shadow, the last of my hesitation dissolved. This was right. This was where I was meant to be. What followed was both exactly what I'd imagined and nothing like I'd expected. There was awkwardness, yes, moments of uncertainty, of silent communication, of figuring out how our bodies fit together. But there was also laughter, surprising and warm. And tenderness I hadn't anticipated. And feelings so intense they bordered on overwhelming. Not just physical sensation, but emotional connection. Vulnerability laid bare. Afterward, we lay tangled together, sweat cooling on our skin, heartbeats gradually slowing. Javi's fingers traced lazy patterns on my back, following the line of my spine. "Okay?" he asked softly. "More than okay," I murmured against his chest. "Perfect." He pressed a kiss to the top of my head, arms tightening around me. "Stay," he said. "Not just tonight. Stay tomorrow, and the next day." The invitation to extend our private world, to create a bubble where we existed only for each other, was tempting. But reality intruded, persistent and unavoidable. "I have work," I reminded him. "So do you." "Call in sick. I'll close the garage for a couple days." "Javi?" I lifted my head to look at him. "We can't just hide away forever?" Something shifted in his expression, a shadow passing over the contentment that had been there moments before. "I know," he said, "but I wish we could. Just for a little while." The wistfulness in his voice made my chest ache. I understood then that for all his confidence, his easy charm, this was frighteningly new territory for him too. He'd spent years compartmentalizing his life, keeping his sexuality separate from his work, his family, his public persona. Now those compartments were beginning to blur, and the implications terrified him. "What are we doing, Evan?" he asked, his voice barely audible in the candlelit room. "Where does this go?" The questions hung between us, impossible to answer, impossible to ignore. We had been living in a suspended moment, in the liminal space created by renovation and darkness and secret meetings. But that space was contracting. The renovation was nearly complete. The power would eventually return. Daylight would come. I don't know, I admitted. I've never done this before. Neither have I. Not like this. His hand found mine, fingers interlacing. Not where it matters so much. The simple confession that this mattered, that I mattered, made my throat tighten. For someone who had spent years making himself invisible, being seen, truly seen, was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. We figure it out together, I said, squeezing his hand. Day by day. He nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. Together, he echoed. We fell asleep like that, hands clasped, bodies aligned, candlelight flickering across the ceiling. For that night, at least, the questions could wait. The complicated reality of navigating a relationship that existed in shadows could wait. For that night, we were simply two people who had found each other in darkness, who had created light together. The power returned at dawn, appliances humming back to life, normalcy reasserting itself. But something had shifted irrevocably between us. The final boundary had been crossed. We were fully entangled now, physically, emotionally, irrevocably. The renovation entered its final phase. Inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, examining wiring and plumbing and structural elements. Final touches were applied. Light switch plates installed, baseboards secured, paint touch-ups completed. The chaos that had defined our lives for nearly 2 months began to recede, replaced by order and functionality. And with it came an unexpected sense of loss. The construction that had driven us together was ending. The disruption that had created our private world was being resolved. What would happen when normalcy returned completely? When we no longer had renovation as an excuse for crossing paths, for spending time together? The question remained unspoken between us, but I felt its weight in the way Javi held me tighter at night, in the increasingly frequent texts throughout the day, in the plans we made for after. After the construction crews left, after the building returned to its ordinary rhythms. We were creating our own renovation now, rebuilding the structures of our separate lives to make room for each other. It was messy, uncertain work. There were no blueprints to follow, no foreman to direct the process. The night before the final inspection, we sat together on the small balcony of his apartment, watching stars appear in the deepening twilight. The courtyard below was quiet, the evening breeze rustling through leaves. All evidence of construction had been removed. No tarps, no tools, no materials. If not for the fresh paint and new fixtures, it would be impossible to tell that anything had changed at all. Remember when we first met? Javi asked, his voice soft in the gathering darkness. In the lobby when we got locked out? I nodded, smiling at the memory. You rescued me from a night sleeping in the hallway. I think it was the other way around, he said, his expression thoughtful. I'd been watching you for weeks, trying to figure out how to introduce myself without seeming weird. When you showed up in the lobby that night, looking so lost and annoyed. He laughed softly. It felt like the universe was finally cutting me a break. The admission that what I'd perceived as chance had been something he'd been hoping for made me reconsider those early encounters. Had I really been as invisible as I'd thought? Or had I simply been unwilling to see the connections forming around me? Would you have said something eventually? I asked. If the renovation hadn't happened? He considered the question, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. I'd like to think so, but honestly. He turned to me, his expression open, vulnerable. I might have let you remain a fantasy, the mysterious guy upstairs. Safer that way. The honesty of his answer struck me. For all his confidence, his ease in the world, Javi carried his own fears, his own hesitations. The renovation hadn't just pushed me out of my comfort zone, it had pushed him too, had forced both of us to confront possibilities we might otherwise have avoided. I'm glad you didn't, I said. Let me remain a fantasy. His smile was soft, intimate in the twilight. Me too. He reached for my hand, his expression growing more serious. Evan, I need to tell you something. My heart stuttered at his tone. What is it? He took a deep breath, as though steeling himself. I've been offered a job, a big restoration project for a private collector in Seattle. 6 months of work at least. Good money, really good money. The words landed like stones, heavy and undeniable. Seattle, I repeated, the implication slowly sinking in. When would you go? That's the thing, he said, his grip on my hand tightening. I haven't accepted yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Why? The question escaped before I could consider it. This is your work, your career. Why would you need to talk to me? Something flashed in his eyes, hurt, perhaps, or surprise. Because you're part of my life now, because whatever decision I make affects us both. Because... He hesitated. Because I'm falling in love with you, and the thought of leaving, of going back to being strangers passing in hallways. It feels wrong. It feels like giving up something rare before it's had a chance to become what it could be. The confession, so raw, so unexpected, left me momentarily speechless. Love. He was falling in love with me. The digital ghost, the invisible neighbor, the man who had spent years retreating from the world rather than engaging with it. You don't have to say anything, he continued, misinterpreting my silence. I know it's fast. I know it's complicated. But I needed you to know before I make any decisions. I found my voice finally, though it emerged rougher than I'd intended. When do you need to decide? By the end of the week, he said. I've already pushed the deadline once. 4 days. 4 days to determine the course of whatever was growing between us. 4 days to decide whether this connection was strong enough to withstand distance, or whether it had been merely a product of proximity and renovation, a temporary disruption rather than a permanent reconfiguration. What do you want to do? I asked, needing to understand his perspective before offering my own. Javi was silent for a long moment, his gaze turning back to the stars emerging above us. Professionally, I'd be an idiot to turn it down. It's the kind of opportunity that changes careers. The kind of restoration project that gets featured in magazines. He paused, his thumb tracing circles on my palm. But personally, the thought of leaving now, just when we're finding our way to each other... He shook his head. It feels like terrible timing. The conflict was evident in his voice, in the tension of his body beside mine. I understood it intimately. The collision of professional opportunity and personal connection. The impossible calculus of weighing one against the other. You should take it, I said finally, the words costing more than I'd expected. It's all too important to pass up. His eyes found mine in the darkness, searching. Just like that? You're okay with me leaving? No, I admitted. I'm not okay with it at all. But I'd be less okay with being the reason you turned down something that matters to you. That's not how I want this to start, with sacrifice and resentment. I wouldn't resent you, he protested. Maybe not at first, but eventually. I shook my head. I know how it feels to give up opportunities, Javi. To make your world smaller because it feels safer that way. I've been doing it for years. The truth of the statement hit me as I spoke it. I had been contracting my world, limiting my horizons, choosing isolation over connection because it eliminated the risk of rejection, of failure, of loss. But in doing so, I'd also eliminated the possibility of discovery, of growth, of love. So what are you saying? Javi asked, his voice carefully neutral. That we end this now? Before it gets any harder? No, I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. I'm saying we don't let geography dictate what happens between us. I work remotely. My desk could be anywhere with an internet connection. The implication hung between us, clear and startling. You'd consider coming with me? He asked, disbelief coloring his words. To Seattle? I don't know, I answered honestly. Maybe not right away, but eventually, if this is real, and I think it might be, then yes, I'd consider it. The admission felt both terrifying and liberating. For years, I'd clung to stability, to known quantities, to the controlled environment I'd built. The thought of dismantling that, of following this man to a new city, a new life, should have paralyzed me with fear. Instead, I felt something like exhilaration, as though I'd been standing at the edge of a precipice for years and had finally gathered the courage to leap. Javi's expression transformed, disbelief giving way to wonder, to a hope so naked it made my chest ache. "You'd do that? For me?" "For us," I corrected. "For whatever this is becoming." He leaned forward, his forehead resting against mine, his breath warm on my face. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. "You don't have to deserve me," I said, my hands coming up to frame his face. "You just have to want me, as I am. Digital ghost and all." His laugh was soft, slightly broken. "I do, more than I have ever wanted anything." We remained like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, the possibility of a future, uncertain but shared, stretching before us. Then he pulled back slightly, his expression growing serious again. "But you have a life here. Your apartment, your routine. I can't ask you to give that up." "You're not asking," I pointed out. "I'm offering, and besides," I gestured to the building around us. "This place is different now. Renovated. Changed. Maybe I'm ready for change too." The simple truth resonated between us. We had both been changed, not just by each other, but by the disruption that had brought us together. The jackhammers and dust and chaos had forced us out of comfortable patterns, had created space for something new to emerge. Javi stood, pulling me to my feet. "Come here," he said, leading me to the edge of the small balcony. "Look." Together we gazed out over the courtyard, now visible only in outline as darkness settled fully. The wind had picked up, rustling through leaves, causing plastic sheeting on a nearby balcony to ripple and snap. "Tomorrow morning, they finish the inspection," he said, his voice low in the darkness. "By noon, all the construction equipment will be gone. The renovation will be officially complete." I nodded, understanding the significance. The catalyst that had brought us together would be removed. The excuse for our constant proximity would vanish. We would be left with only what we had built between us, no longer neighbors navigating chaos, but two men choosing each other deliberately. Javi turned to me, his expression barely visible in the dim light from the apartment behind us. His voice, when he spoke, was raw with emotion. "I would leave this city, my tools, my routine, but only if you asked me to." The words hung between us, a declaration, a promise, a question. The weight of it settled in my chest, both terrifying and exhilarating. For years, I had made myself small, invisible, contained. Had believed that safety lay in isolation, in controlled environments, in predictable outcomes. Now this man, this mechanic with grease-stained hands and a heart more complex than any engine, was offering me something dangerous. Something uncharted. Something real. My throat tightened as I regarded him in the darkness. Wind tugged at his hair, at the plastic sheeting below, at leaves in the courtyard. Morning would come. The renovation would end. Decisions would have to be made. But for now, in this moment, we stood together at the edge of the balcony, of possibility, of whatever came next. Two people who had found each other in chaos, who had created something neither had expected to find. Two people standing at the threshold of something new being built.